Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, and this is my 500th video. Oy vey. I can't believe it. 500 videos, yes. And if you were waiting for this one to get through that first 499, your ship has come in, because this is it, number 500. And if you were not subscribing yet to this channel, but you saw the first 499, then what are you waiting for? Please subscribe now. Tell your friends. There's a lot of stuff. But it's also just a drop in the bucket. And I was sort of agonizing over what I would do for my 500th video. And then I realized, it's just a drop in the bucket. There's so much still to come, so much I want to talk to you about. And I said to myself, let's just continue with the fun stuff that we're doing. And so this video is also the Haydn Symphony Crusade, number 14, because we're in the middle of stuff. 500 is not an end point. It's not even a midpoint. It's sort of closer to the beginning. And that's where we are in the Haydn Symphony Crusade with Symphony number 14 in A major. And so let's talk about music instead of numbers of videos. Symphony number 14 is a delightfully sophisticated little work. I mean, all of these symphonies are so special in their way. And this one is it's a chamber symphony in a sense. The orchestra is small. It's just two oboes, two horns, a bassoon on the bottom with the continuo, if you have one, and strings. That's it. As simple as can be. And it has the most wonderfully open and breezy quality to it. And yet, even though this is just a happy-go-lucky, rollicking piece in A major, that very fact lends the music some special qualities. For example, the tone of the horns in A major in Haydn's day was quite special. The most famous piece of music in A major is Beethoven's Seventh, symphonically speaking. And the Seventh is noted, if you know Beethoven's Seventh, for those amazing ringing high horns. Well, you'll hear them in this symphony too. And the reason is because A major is, relatively speaking, a high key for horns. When you write in A major, that is, the notes that they can produce don't start happening in the A major scale until you get kind of higher in the horn's range. And that gives the entire tutti, that is the orchestral sonority, a very special quality, a level of tension and a brilliance because of those high horns. And they sound glorious here, just as they did in Beethoven's Seventh. In addition, this entire symphony, except for the second movement, is in triple time. The first movement is in 3/4. The Minuet is in 3/4, which, as you know, is waltz tempo. So it's a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's a dance tempo. And the finale is in compound meter. That is 6/8, which can be divided into two. That is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, which is how it actually goes in this finale for the most part. Or it could also be divided into three. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Like that. And sometimes Haydn does both, which makes the rhythm very, very tricky on the one hand, but on the other hand, also very flowing and free, and again, dance-like. The slow movement is the only movement in duple time, in 2. And that, for a slow movement, is fine because it's slow tempos. You don't get that feeling of a strong dance-like pulse, unless it's a slow march, for example, which this one is not. So the entire symphony has a dance-like, light, breezy quality. But that doesn't mean it ain't symphonic, because boy, is it. And the things that Haydn does in this symphony are so cool, so marvelous. Starting with the first movement. Now, because it's in 3/4, and Haydn is emphasizing that, the opening theme is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. It's obviously in 3/4. And the second subject in the sonata form, which has the usual two subjects, is in two-part counterpoint between the two violin sections with the rhythm slightly off and syncopated. But the really nifty thing about this movement is that the development section, which is very, very brief, isn't even really the development section. More development happens in the recapitulation than in the development. And that's really fascinating because in previous symphonies, you may have noticed that in getting from the first subject to the second subject, because they're all staying in the same key or around the same key, Haydn generally shortens the distance because the music doesn't have to go anywhere. It's actually going to stay more or less in its home key. And so the motion music, the music between the two subjects that's designed to take you from point A and leave you at point B, doesn't have to be so long. It gets recomposed to get you there more efficiently. But in this symphony, Haydn does just the opposite. He really saves most of the development for the motion music in the recapitulation. And you only know where you are when the second subject returns, now in the home key. And that has the paradoxical result that it's even more of a relief, even more satisfying than it might otherwise have been. And the fascinating thing about it is that it gives this tiny little movement. I mean, it's 3 and a bit minutes long. And when I play it for you, I'll play you the whole movement without repeats. So that's less than 2 minutes of music. But it has this sense of size, of expansiveness. It's dance-like and breezy, and it sounds like it has all the time in the world, because at one very significant point, Haydn makes sure that we don't really know where we are. And it's only when we finally arrive at the end that we go, oh, whoosh, yes, we're home after all. And that takes this very, very light and very small-scale symphony and gives it an entirely different sense of depth and of scale. It's absolutely amazing the way he does it. And as usual, when the music plays, I'm going to indicate where the second subject is and where the recapitulation technically starts, so you can hear exactly how much more Haydn has to do before we get to the actual end of the movement. It's just great. It's absolutely great. And it doesn't depend on you knowing what the form is. You just listen from point to point. That's all. And let the music give you the expressive feelings that it does when they arrive. You don't have to worry in advance, but I'm going to point it out to you because knowing what's happening is so much fun. It's just so cool. I can't even begin to tell you. Anyway, here, listen to the first movement now without repeats all the way through. This is by the way, the Toronto Camerata, conducted by Kevin Mallon on Naxos. Here you go. Did you see what I mean? I hope you heard that. That sense of continual expansion until we get to the very end. And that's one way that Haydn's able to write music that's very short and concise and breezy, and it always leaves you wanting more, but it doesn't sound small. It doesn't sound constricted. And that's what's so cool about it. Now, the second movement is for strings only. It's an andante, and all of the movements in sonata form in this symphony are going to do similar things with the form. They're all sort of backloaded. Now, if the first movement had more development after the recapitulation, it still had a real development section. Slow movement sonata form, as I mentioned once before, often leaves out the development altogether. It's just A, B, and then A, B. But the return of A has a lot more development in it, naturally, because if there's no development section otherwise. So we already have something quite similar to what you're going to hear in the first movement and again in the finale. And this is one of the ways that Haydn unifies the symphony and treats it as a single conception. But even beyond that, the concept of expansion of something in a small space that sounds a lot bigger than it really is a theme that runs through all of the movements, every single one of them, in the larger formal sense, but also in the second movement in the melodic sense, because the tune itself starts out like it's going to become almost like a folk song. It has a very, very simple, definitive ending that doesn't end. Haydn keeps extending it out into several extra phrases so that you don't know when the melody is really going to end. And again, I will put a little arrow here over the cadence where you think it ought to end, and then just listen to how Haydn keeps you guessing to find out when it's really going to end. And the result is just as it was in the first movement, a sense of enlargement, of music that has all the time in the world, when really it's incredibly concise and incredibly brief. We're talking about 60 seconds of music for the entire exposition of this movement. And you would never know otherwise. But when you hear it, you go, oh, it just has that wonderful leisurely lilt and the surprise when it doesn't end where you think it's going to. So here is the exposition. It's all you need to hear of the slow movement. And then after this lovely little exposition, you can hear how the music basically just keeps on going, spitting out the same concept, the same theme, in slightly different versions or variants, just as happened in the first movement. And we'll hear again in the finale. But now we come to the minuet. The minuet is, because minuet forms tend to be very, very strict. It's just, two halves. Both get repeated normally, although for some reason in this performance the first half doesn't get repeated, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to play the whole minuet without repeats, straight through once. In this case, Haydn gives you this sense of expansion by using his by now patented technique of unusual phrase lengths. The first phrase of the minuet is 10 bars divided into a regular 4-bar phrase and a 6-bar continuation. But the second part of the theme is 18 bars in 3 units of 6 each. 6, 6, and 6. And that is quite unusual because usually usual phrases, as we've discussed, come in groups of 4 or 8. That's what sounds balanced and regular to us, to our hearing, for billions of reasons we can't describe and don't need to go into. So this entire minuet is either, the phrases are either too short or too long, but in this case, Haydn contrives that they all sound like a little bit longer than they normally are. And for that reason, although this is 28 bars, that's all you're going to hear right now, again, the sound of it is somehow more expansive, more leisurely, not leisurely in a dull way, leisurely in an open way, in a way of having time to make its points and to do them with a certain casual ease and jollity that's really very, very striking. So here is the entire A section, straight through, of the minuet. Now, I'm sure you saw, I put in the bar lengths as the music was going, so you could hear how the music got divided up into its little sections. And it's as I said, it's marvelous, marvelous. The middle section, the trio, is a beautiful solo for oboe that's in the minor key and somewhat exotic sounding, where Haydn is beginning, I think, in this trio, which I'm not going to play, you can listen for yourself, to explore some of that Hungarian folk music ethos that he began to exploit so wonderfully in some of the middle symphonies and, of course, in the later works as well. But this is one of the places where it starts to show up because that oboe solo has a real touch of exoticism to it. Now we come to the finale. Ah, the finale. This is such a great little finale. It's great for so many reasons. First of all, the form is exactly the same as that of the first movement in the sense that you can't tell where the recapitulation really starts. It sounds like it's just developing straight up to the end until you get to the second subject. The entire movement is monothematic. It's all based on the opening theme. And the opening theme is nothing but a scale, a 7-note scale. In 6/8 time, it's ya da 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 da. That's the theme. And the second subject is just the first 4 notes of it played twice. It's da 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 da. That's the second subject. That's the entire substance of the movement. But it doesn't sound quite that simple because this is Haydn and because he's exploiting in this opening theme 2-part counterpoint against that simple descending scale, which is in 6/8. So it's 1 2 3 2 2 3 1 2 3 2 2 3 3 2 3 like that. It's just like that. You have the actual pulse, 1 2 3 4 5 6, 1 2 3 4 5 6 underneath. And so he has this incredibly syncopated contrapuntal accompaniment. So which is it's bum ba da 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 da. It's a very I'm not doing it right, but it doesn't matter. What that does is make the tension between the two contrapuntal lines incredibly striking, and it makes it sound very complicated. I mean, you really can't even tell where the rhythm is at all, even though it's very simple to play. When you look at it on paper, if you see, it's just a straight descending scale in even rhythm, and then a lightly syncopated accompaniment. But putting them together, the way they interweave, is what makes that opening theme sound like the most rhythmically intricate thing in the universe. It's really, really cool. And so that gives the entire movement, again, this sense of flow, of easeful flow because you're not sure where the beats are going to fall. And because you're not sure where the beats are falling, you're not sure where the music is going. And then when the development section happens, it's nothing but this scale thing going down, descending with all this other stuff around it. And because the development, how do you develop a scale? You just play the scale, right? So when we get to the recapitulation, there's virtually no way of knowing that we're actually recapitulating until we get, once again, as we did in the first movement, to that quieter second subject where everything calms down for a minute and we can actually hear what Haydn's doing. And then the symphony just bounces along to its jovial conclusion. So here, without further ado, is the entire finale of Symphony number 14 with no repeats, straight through. And listen again to the horns. Listen again to that wonderful tension that those high horn notes provide. Whether they're sustained or solo, it doesn't make any difference. It's just terrific. Here you go. Fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. And so once again, you see Haydn creating a unified conception of a symphony, but that's unified formally and also expressively. This is a happy piece, but happy in a particularly bucolic, almost pastoral, wonderful way that doesn't sound like anything else Haydn wrote or anything else anybody else wrote, except possibly for the horn writing, which will remind us of Beethoven's Seventh because of the key. And with that, we have come to the conclusion of the 500th video, and Haydn Symphony Crusade number 14. Thank you so much for joining me. This whole journey has been a crusade, the first 500 or so. I'm looking forward to the next 500. I hope you will continue to stick with me, and we've got so much more to talk about. It's going to be so much fun. I'm already making plans, and I hope that we'll be together for a very, very long time to come. Through good times, through bad times, through all the times that we have to spend together. Keep on listening, folks. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.